6 months into this war, and today Israeli forces are still fighting Hamas gunmen house to house. And it was here in Khan Yunis, southern Gaza, where commandos unearthed a grim discovery: the body of an Israeli hostage. 47-year-old Elad Katzir was taken from his kibbutz in the Hamas-led October 7th attack. He was dragged into Gaza by another militant group, the Islamic Jihad. Israel believe his captors killed him in mid-January. It was at this time Elad's sister was camped outside the Israeli Prime Minister's house, begging for a deal. Every day that passes reduces the chance that he will return to us alive, she said. And now he has come back dead. Today, in a statement on Facebook, Karmit blamed the government for his death. He could have been saved if a deal had happened in time, she writes. Our leadership is cowardly and driven by political considerations, and that is why it didn't happen. Tonight, Israelis call for the release of 133 hostages still inside Gaza. There's no sign a deal is close for their return. Hamas said it's sending a delegation to Cairo on Sunday for a new round of talks, but one Israeli official has dismissed them as more political theatre than actual progress. While Israelis wait for the release of their loved ones, Gazans wait for food. Today, some arrives in another airdrop over northern Gaza. It's a chaotic, humiliating, and at times dangerous method of delivery. Mohammed Nasser has to fight for food to feed his family. We are dying to feed our children, he says, managing to get just one meal for his wife and kids. Under pressure from the US to let more aid in here, the rare sight of aid trucks brought cheers on the streets. For the last 3 months, Oxfam says Palestinians living in this part of Gaza are surviving on an average of just 245 calories a day.
In a famine situation, putting food on someone's doorstep or dropping it from the sky or offloading it off a pier could be dangerous. It's not just minimally helpful. It could be dangerous to severely, acutely malnourished people. What's needed is medical interventions to bring a lot of those people back. And that is a very human resource intensive phase of a humanitarian response.
In the north, Wael and his daughters collect mallow leaves. It's all they have to eat. And to cook it, they burn the remains of their collapsed homes. That's the one thing not in short supply.
Emily Wither reporting. Well, earlier I spoke to Arwa Damon, president and founder of Inara, a charity she set up almost a decade ago, largely to provide care to children injured or traumatized by war. She's currently working in Gaza, and I asked her what impact the aid that had managed to come through today could have on the population there. And just to warn you, some of what she describes is very difficult to hear.
Aid coming through is great, yes, but it depends on the quantity that is coming through, and it also depends on how sustained and regulated that is. When you have this level of desperation that we're seeing in Gaza, especially in the north, and we've all seen the images of these aid trucks getting completely and totally swarmed and people drowning trying to reach the airdrops that had fallen into the sea. When we take that level of desperation into consideration, the only way to actually be able to properly manage aid distribution is to get levels to a degree where people no longer feel as if they have to panic to be able to get the essential aid.
You specifically deal with children. How difficult is it for children to access this aid and what they need on a daily basis?
Women in this entire area are grabbing their babies and shoving them at you, and the babies are completely listless, and so many of them are severely malnourished. Children are not getting, proper nutrition. They're not able to eat 3 meals a day. The World Central Kitchen strike that happened, which was absolutely horrific and terrifying, and led to the World Central Kitchen pausing its operations, has also had an extraordinarily devastating effect because they fed millions. And so, when we're talking about insufficient aid and children's ability to access it, we're also talking about what happens to a child who is severely malnourished, who has been severely traumatized, and so many of the children are injured, but their bodies are too weak to really be able to help them overcome their injuries. And this is why you'll hear a lot of organizations talking about the need to flood the zone, allowing enough aid in so that people can be reassured that it's not a one-off, that this is going to keep coming and that they do not need to panic every single time an aid truck shows up or a water truck shows up. So when we talk about flooding the zone, we're also not just talking about flooding it with humanitarian aid, but also with humanitarian workers. Clinics need to be set up. Medical staff needs to be set up. We need to recognize that everyone who is in the humanitarian and medical and any other service-oriented space in Gaza has been living this horrific nightmare for the last 6 months and is completely exhausted. And then you also begin to get, these small little glimpses of the psychological toll of all of this especially on children, which is one thing that, my organization also focuses on. And as we were leaving one area, a woman came up and said, listen, can you help out my son? Because he is screaming and he keeps convulsing, and he's been doing this ever since he saw his younger sisters had blown off when a strike hit the house.
The UN have called this today a betrayal of humanity. How do you see this?
It's very much a betrayal of humanity. I think it's very much an indication of just how broken our sort of collective moral compass is. I mean, it's rather absurd when one thinks about the fact that, aid is sitting, hundreds and hundreds of trucks are sitting, at a crossing, or the fact that the Erez crossing that we were talking about can be opened and could have been opened sooner, and then when we're talking about the fact that, the United States, Europe, Israel is an ally country to them. We're not talking about, some sort of foreign bizarre entity or a nation with which the West does not have any sort of ties. It's very difficult to understand, and Palestinians can't understand it. The only thing that they'll really say to you is that, it's just very clear to them right now how little value their life holds. And it's extraordinarily sad that Palestinians feel as if they need to somehow convince, the Western world that they live and they love and they laugh and they hurt just like the rest of us.
Awa Damon, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, the government here is coming under increasing pressure to make a decision on the sale of arms to Israel following the deadly attack on a convoy of aid workers in Gaza. In the latest development, a group of lawyers has signed a letter arguing there is no legal justification for suspending weapons sales or calling for a ceasefire. It follows calls earlier in the week for a ban on future arms sales and an immediate and permanent ceasefire. Jane Dodge reports.
The charity logo proved no protection for the aid workers inside. 3 vehicles destroyed by drones in what the Israeli Defense Forces have now confirmed was a mistake. 7 people working for the world's central kitchen were killed, 3 of them British. Their deaths have hardened opinion both here and abroad. 2 days ago, hundreds of the UK's top lawyers and judges wrote to the Prime Minister calling for a suspension of arms exports to Israel and an immediate ceasefire.
The UK government's recent actions have demonstrated an increasingly robust stance to Israel, and we welcome that. But it's not doing enough. And the sale of arms, the export of arms to Israel is a very clear example of that. Which the letter argues is in breach of its international legal obligations.
The lawyers referred to the provisional order of the International Court of Justice back in January that they said supported their view there was a plausible risk of genocide in Gaza. Now hundreds of other lawyers have signed a letter to Rishi Sunak saying the UK should not demand an immediate ceasefire and that there's no justification for suspending the sale of weapons without evidence of systematic violation by Israel of international law.
Israel is not committing genocide in the Gaza Strip, and there really is no evidence to that effect. And their interpretation of the provisional measures that were ordered by the International Court of Justice is incorrect.
Writing in today's Daily Mail, the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson said it would be insane for the UK to end military support for Israel. He also took a swipe at the man he helped oust as Prime Minister, accusing David Cameron, now Foreign Secretary, of going into a kind of purdah on the subject.
First thing, all of us, every foreign minister needs to go back to their country, get hold of their defence minister and ask, what more can we do?
Lord Cameron has had a lot to say about Ukraine, 2 whole minutes to camera on Thursday, but nothing on suspending arms exports to Israel and nothing on publishing advice from government lawyers about whether Israel has breached international law.
If arms export licences would risk breaking international humanitarian law, then those licences should not be granted. And that's why we need to have transparency of advice and the evidence, and for Parliament to play its proper role in taking this decision.
Joe Biden is under growing pressure too. Nearly 70% of Israel's arms imports come from the US. Dozens of Democrats, including the former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, are now urging him to call time on any future deals.